My name is Linda Lees and I am the Lifelong Learning Strategic Manager with City Bedford Council. And as I said, it's absolutely great to have so many of you here today. I would just again also like to acknowledge the funding for Creative Conversations, which is from Education Scotland and Creative Scotland. And I think we may have some colleagues here from both those organisations with us today. So thank you for helping us and supporting us to continue Creative Conversations. Now, normally at this point, I would just hand over to David, who can introduce our fabulous lineup of guests. But before I do that, this is a creative conversation we were actually going to have about a year ago, just before lockdown. And, you know, it's been fantastic that we've been able to have so many creative conversations online. And I think going forward, we are starting to look forward to coming back into the flesh, into meeting each other in person and having 3D encounters instead of these 2D encounters. But that said, creative conversations have still been really good online, and we're really pleased that Graham and Hywel and others have joined us here today. Anyway, as I say, I normally would hand over to David at this point, but today and next I'm going to hand over to our new interim director of schools and children's services. I think I've got that right. And Julian Kramer is with us, and he's going to say a few words. Just welcome him to Edinburgh. I think it's day 2 in the job, Julian, so we're really delighted that not only are you here in Edinburgh with us, but that you've agreed to join our creative conversation this evening. So very huge welcome to Edinburgh, but an even bigger welcome to the creative conversation. So I'll hand over to you now. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Linda. Good afternoon, colleagues. When David and Linda invited me to give a few words and I saw an audience of 180, I really thought we could have sold tickets. And then somebody mentioned the first speakers giving away £20 notes. I'm not. So, colleagues, we all like a story of defiance, subversion, and the heroic underdog succeeding. And I've got one for you. First of all, despite appearances, I am the new boy. It's a privilege to serve the city of Edinburgh, its children, its communities. Sadly, it is my 12th local authority as head of service. I probably need to get out a bit more. My accent gives me away as coming from the Principality. I am a Celt. This is no mission to educate the Scots. The English, perhaps. Neither is it an occasion for cross-border Welsh invasion. We are all Celts, and I just wanted to get away from the Welsh weather. Have I made a mistake? I don't know. A quick word on class and disadvantage before I move on. Why Julian? What was my mother thinking of? Clearly ambitious for me, equally clearly dyslexic, couldn't spell properly. I need to tell you, colleagues, there is no silver spoon. It's a council estate in South Wales. Education is the passport. So yes, this is excitingly day 2 for me. As Mark Twain said, he needed a good 3 weeks to do a good impromptu. No sequins from me, no dry ice, and regrettably, no pink boob tube. Instead, a happy spontaneity. So I began my teaching career imbued with the ideas and the pedagogy of Lawrence Stenhouse and the liberal curriculum. Does anybody remember that? It dates me nicely. I drifted along through my teaching headship into dictatorship. Did I mean directorship? And then I met with Ken Robinson, he of all our futures. What a remarkable man. The only report from central government worth reading. And that was before he became a professor, became famous, and went to America. So here's the story. After 5 years working with some brilliant teachers and heads in Greenwich to recover a failing service, I was asked to set up a new county service in Worcestershire. Where is Worcestershire? Who knows? Think Morgan Cars, think Edward Elgar, think Worcester Sauce, a big untidy county, a new service. So we got it from poor to good after 3 years. And then the government said every local authority needed to have a local authority development plan. Well, we were average at everything. And I didn't want to do average literacy, average numeracy. So I said to our 5-party hung council, why don't we do creativity across the curriculum? They all said, yes, that sounds like a good idea. The government said no. I went back to the council and given their defiance, they said we'd do it anyway, across the curriculum and across the county. So we were, colleagues, the only council in England allowed to be creative. The result was we had 5 years of music, art, dance, drama, sculpture, performance, between 18 and 25,000 children engaged in creativity across the county in almost every venue you could consider, from cathedral to cloister, village hall, stately home, parklands, libraries, schools. Ken visited regularly. He spoke with us, and in his book he gave us a mention. Suddenly, when All Our Futures was published, Worcestershire was centre stage. We were delivering creativity. He came and gave a keynote speech in the cathedral, told some memorable, if unrepeatable, jokes, and then went to America. We then got inspected by Ken Dyson HMI and his team, known to his friends as Killer Dyson. They said we were excellent, no key weaknesses. This is when local authorities were allowed to be good. So, defiant, subversive, heroic, who knew? So, colleagues, I comment 3 points from this. Firstly, as Socrates said, the purpose of life is happiness. And when asked to define that, Plato said happiness is creativity and fulfillment. In the broadest sense, if we can be creative, we will give our children life-enhancing, life-sustaining experiences. Secondly, teachers are far and away the most creative people I have ever met. Teachers are everywhere. Let's unleash them. Yes, we need the emotional intelligence to see how stressed and how tired our service is as we emerge from a prolonged pandemic. We must offer, induce, persuade, and respect our colleagues as they recover the service to creatively address the lost learning that our children need. And finally, colleagues, we need a resolute focus on the needs of our most vulnerable. The middle class has no monopoly on brain power or creative talent, but learning through poverty and learning through hunger is hard. The journey is longer. We need strong aspiration, clear supportive pathways, and robust scaffolding of the creative learning opportunities for all our children if they are to succeed. We need resilience and determination. So, colleagues, I celebrate the creative conversations, Linda Lee's energy and vision, and your own work. Let's do creatively well for the children of Edinburgh, and let's have a creative conversation. Thank you.
Well, that's quite a start. Well done. I can see Alan Cameron clapping away in front of his keyboards there, down somewhere in the borders. Julian, welcome to Edinburgh. And the hope is that you will now take the opportunity to deliver on all of that. That's absolutely brilliant. Just to let everyone know, we're now changing the title of these conversations to the Real Creative Conversations, given that everyone in the world seems to be jumping on the bandwagon of them. So we'll now be known as the RCCs. This is a real creative conversation today. We've covered everything this year, from anti-racist education. We've talked about how education should respond to the Care Review in Scotland. We've talked about Ken Robinson. Julian, we had a tribute to Ken Robinson as well, and Ken Robertson, who's lesser known. And what we did with that was looked at his legacy, but also looked at what's yet to be done. And that's the key thing for us, I think, is how we drive that process forward. And I'm delighted that Julian mentioned the whole idea of missed learning. It's not about catching up, it's about making good. And I think that's been the key message that's come through from that. And we make good by using the opportunity that we have to engage children, to challenge them, to make them more than they might otherwise be. That's what we've been trying to do through this. And we've talked lots and lots about change, but what we find it difficult to do, and what we've certainly found it difficult to do in Scotland, is to make change that lasts. We've had lots of change, and in the terms that I use constantly, far too little difference, particularly for the young people that Julian was referring to when he spoke earlier. That's what we're really talking about today. This seems to be a conversation about Wales. It's not. It's a conversation about change and how we make it. And we've decided to start it from Wales because we genuinely believe that there's some really interesting developments taking place there. We think they're really exciting. We think there's a lot to be learned from that. And we also feel that we don't do enough listening to each other in the United Kingdom. We're too ready to go to Finland, to elsewhere in the Nordic countries, to Taiwan, or wherever else somebody manages to get a free ticket to, and come back with all sorts of advice for how we move things on. But our belief is that there's so much opportunity for learning on our doorsteps. And Wales, I think, is a particularly good example of that. When Graham Donaldson talked to me about the changes in Wales earlier, he used a phrase which resonated with me then and has stayed with me since. He talked about the changes in Wales, and I want to get this right, as an act of faith by government in the teaching profession. And that seemed to me to be a really worthwhile ambition. And that seemed to me to be the way that we would all want to be able to describe educational change when it's driven nationally. An act of faith by government in the teaching profession. And we're delighted that Graham is here today to introduce our conversation. Many of you will be aware of Graham. He seems to have done virtually everything in Scottish education, even taught for a fortnight. So Graham's made a real contribution to change in Scotland, starting from standard grade right up to Curriculum for Excellence. He was the author of the Donaldson report. He was Chief Inspector. He led Education Scotland. He's been engaged right across the board in Scottish education. He's also a Knight Commander of the Bath, which means that he's as likely to feature in the Crown as he is to feature in Waterloo Road. I don't think we've ever had a Knight Commander of the Bath on a creative conversation before, so that's an absolute delight for us. But what he's done in Wales is he led the Successful Futures Review and then stayed on as an advisor to Welsh Government. And that, I think, is very unusual and very unique. So I'm going to ask Graham to step in now and just kick off this conversation. Thanks very much, and welcome to Graham Donaldson.
David, thank you very much for that typically colourful introduction. My task actually is relatively straightforward, and I mean this sincerely. It's really just to set the context for the three school leaders that are going to follow me to be able to talk to you about how they are seeking to make a reality of what is a hugely ambitious educational reform programme in Wales. It's a reform programme which has echoes of what happened in Scotland in the earlier part of this century and continues to be the case. But it is very much its own beast, if you like. And those three colleagues, I'm really looking forward to hearing what they say in terms of taking forward the agenda. Part of the issue, of course, for all education systems is the impact of the pandemic. My own belief is that the pandemic will accentuate and accelerate forces for change, but it doesn't actually create a whole new agenda for us. I think the challenge for all education systems is to use the experience of the last year purposefully to meet the learning and well-being needs of all young people. What comes next has to be better. The kind of things that were around pre-pandemic and are still around, I think, and this is true internationally, is that there's been an international debate over the course of the last 15, 20 years about the purpose of school education. Why do children go to school? What is it we're trying to achieve in that relatively short period that young people are in school? There's been a perpetual debate about whether what matters most, knowledge or skills, which is the most redundant debate I've ever come across, but it dies hard. So a debate about whether schools are about young people acquiring learning or acquiring learning and then being able to use that learning creatively. There's a debate, which is a long-term debate, about progression in young people's learning and transitions, and why we lose so many young people by creating points of transition as they move through the education system. There's a debate about exams and qualifications and the relationship between those things that we value through the examination system and those things that we profess in relation to the curriculum. And the trick is, of course, to assess what we profess. Well-being is incredibly important. The pandemic has accentuated that, but it is a very important part of the mission that we have as educators. And as Julian said earlier, happiness, a happy school, is a school that where learning will thrive and children will want to engage in the learning process. We've had issues about the nature of what it means to be a teacher, which are not anything to do with the pandemic, but they've been accentuated sometimes by the pandemic. The whole business about the nature of the professional learning that our teachers need to undertake in times of change. And we are living through a time where the scope, scale, and pace of change is like nothing we've experienced in the past. Or as a former historian, or slightly longer than 2 weeks, I would want to stress that the nature of what we are seeing just now. I mean, people talk about this being a point of inflection, that the nature of both society and the economy is changing out of all recognition, and that raises questions for what we do with young people while they are at school. And we also have the globalization of education. That no education system is uninfluenced by what happens, as David said earlier, in places like Finland or Estonia or New Zealand or wherever. And of course, the OECD and PISA is a big factor in terms of encouraging that globalization. We've had issues about accountability. Do you drive quality and change into a system by high stakes accountability, or can you achieve high quality through placing greater trust in the teaching profession, but at the same time expecting the teaching profession to itself engage in its own accountability? And of course, issues of equity, which have been around for as long as I've been in the teaching profession. So how does education stay relevant and ensure that high quality is the norm? Too often, schools are expected to deliver or implement set practices and expectations which are determined elsewhere. Too often, effectiveness is pursued without questioning the value of what is being measured. And too often, education policy aims to create a better past rather than to address the challenges of today and tomorrow, the unprecedented nature of the pace of change in society and the economy. Now, all of that will be familiar to lots of us in Scotland, because actually the debate that took place after the Scottish Parliament was established in 1999 and the debate about education that followed, which ultimately led to Curriculum for Excellence, a lot of those issues I've just been outlining were right at the heart of what the whole curriculum reform and broader governance reform in Scotland was intended to achieve in that early part of this century. The creation of a curriculum which is developing capacities in young people, rather than a curriculum which is defined in terms of chunks of knowledge through subjects or disciplines for specified periods of time. The knowledge matters, the disciplines matter, but they're part of something bigger. They're not the end in itself. A curriculum which is based on youngsters achieving levels at particular stages in their career, summative assessments at that point, but quite radically the notion of a broad general education followed by a senior phase, trying to address particularly the problem of the first 2 years of secondary education, which had defined in all sorts of ways as a waiting room, as where young people mark time, and we lose many young people. Scotland also sought to engage in examination reform at that time. The intention was that the examination reform should be curriculum-led. Interestingly, some of the discussions I've just been engaged in is about how we recapture that curriculum-led examination reform as we move out of the pandemic. Scotland championed self-evaluation as part of accountability, and latterly, in some work that I did through Teaching Scotland's Future, we've recognised the vital importance of professional learning. The issues, I think, in Scotland, which I was very well aware of when I was asked to undertake a review of the national and curriculum and assessment arrangements in Wales, that learning that I had taken from my time in Scotland, it led me to believe that there's a number of things that Wales had to be very careful about or focus on as it was thinking about how to move forward in relation to its reform programme. it had to win the narrative. It had to win the hearts and minds of both the profession in Wales, the political culture in Wales, but also the wider public in Wales. You cannot engage in radical reform unless you have won the argument about why what you're doing is better than what currently existed. I was worried that the way we had defined the curriculum in Scotland through capacities was too narrow. If you think of a capacity, you tend to think of borders. You tend to think of it being circumscribed. We're trying to create a capacity. Therefore, I was one of the things I was thinking about in looking at Wales was, is there a way in which we can address the same kind of issues that Scotland addressed, but not do it through capacities? I was worried about levels, because I think what levels do is to discourage flow in young people's learning. It creates plateaus and points at which young people stop, and the whole system stops and tries to judge where they've reached, rather than having a system where what we're doing through assessment is to encourage young people to move forward. The Curriculum for Excellence was meant to address transitions. It has had some success in that, but I think there's some way to go. And when I retired from the inspectorate in 2010, one of the things that I kept on saying was, we mustn't lose the story of Curriculum for Excellence. It mustn't lose what it was we were trying to achieve in the first place, because in any major reform programme, the tendency is for the reform to become about the technical aspects of the reform rather than the original purpose of the reform. So we lose the purpose and become absorbed with the issues of the moment in terms of the technical issues. I don't think in Scotland we did enough. We assumed too much of our teachers. We didn't invest enough in professional learning as an integral part of the curriculum reform. And I mean that the nature of what we're trying to achieve in Scotland through less prescription and through more responsibility for teachers, more scope for teachers, has huge implications for the nature of what it means to be a teacher, the nature of how we ensure that teachers' learning continues throughout their career. So that culture of learning and inquiry. So all of that was in my head as I undertook the somewhat surprising task of being asked to review the curriculum and assessment arrangements in Wales. And what I found in Wales was an education system which, when I looked at it and visited schools north, south, east and west and central Wales, and came to realise just how geographically difficult Wales is to get round. But there was a disconnect between what I saw in terms of lots and lots of what I thought was really exciting and interesting practice in Wales, and a system that seemed to have lost confidence in itself, where teachers were almost apologising for the education system, partly influenced by the 2009 PISA results and the high stakes central direction policy of the government that followed the panic following the 2009 PISA in Wales. Wales also, much more, I realised that Offa's Dyke is much more permeable than Hadrian's Wall, and the influence of England in Wales is much greater. The tendency to look across Offa's Dyke and see what's happening in England is much greater than it is here in Scotland. And the curriculum going back to 1988, which was based on levels and key stages, I felt again that those levels, those key stages, were introducing false transition points in relation to the way in which young people move through the system. So the report that I produced, Successful Futures, back in 2014, which was followed by a couple of OECD reports, which broadly took the same line as I had been taking in the Successful Futures report, recommended that we think in Wales about a curriculum which is based on a sense of purpose rather than a capacity. Now you might think there's a kind of semantic difference, and I'm playing with words there, but it's not. I think if you're thinking of purposes, you're constantly thinking of how do I achieve those purposes. It's got the word itself has a dynamic built into it, whereas capacity can be something which can be seen as more self-limiting. It's a small point, but I think it's an important point. I recommended that Wales should not have levels, that the curriculum, young people should not be assessed at different levels as they move through. that we should establish a clear line of sight from when young people enter the education system through to the qualifications phase. I recommended the structure should be on the basis of areas of learning and experience, was the phrase that I used. It's not an original phrase, but what it does is to group together cognate areas of learning in order to encourage greater linkage between them, seeing how learning can be linked together in a whole lot of different ways. Subject knowledge matters, but it shouldn't be seen in isolation. It should be seen as a means to an end. Literacy and numeracy remain very important. Wales has done a lot of work, had done a lot of work, and had a literacy and numeracy framework. But I recommended that we create a digital competence framework to go along, and that would be the third basic element in the curriculum: literacy, numeracy, and digital competence as a life skill that nobody can survive without. And deliberately talking about digital competence, not in terms of how you turn the machine on and use press the right buttons, but how you use the technology creatively, how you use the whole digital world creatively as our young people inhabit that world. I recommended that the system of governance in Wales should move through 180 degrees, away from a centrally driven system with high stakes accountability to one that was based on subsidiarity, where wherever you possibly could, you located the decisions as close to the point at which learning was taking place as possible. A system of co-construction where those who were involved at the sharp end in terms of teaching and learning should be intimately involved in the creation of the new curriculum. And in terms of governance, you then created a system that was much less hierarchical and much more collaborative at all levels, at school level, at local authority level, and at national level. Professional learning built in from the start, accountability that was more trust-based. I was asked separately to produce a report on the inspectorate Eston, and I produced a report called a learning inspectorate, and that had deliberately had a double meaning. Inspection is about learning, but inspection has to learn. Inspection itself is not something that's fixed, where inspectors know all the answers and they just see whether or not you're meeting the inspector's expectations. But inspection learns and grows. Changes to the performance structure and changes to the role of consortia, who were very much in a challenge role, and I was suggesting much more move towards support. I didn't make direct recommendations about examinations, other than to say that this whole business had to be then reflected in an examination and qualification structure, which grew out of what became the curriculum for Wales. All of that, and that may sound quite a tall order, but all of that, 68 recommendations and successful futures were all accepted by Welsh Government. An enormously risky thing for Welsh Government to do, to engage in that kind of reform, because it was literally turning the education system on its head. Wales then, I think, has pursued a very intelligent approach through establishing a national mission with a curriculum at its heart, but then seeing enabling objectives that are designed to realise that curriculum through professional learning, through accountability, and through greater equity. And over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, Wales has been building up to that with pioneer schools involved in the development of the curriculum, the creation of this new curriculum, which is now in statute as the curriculum for Wales. But the statute is a very, very slim beast compared to what went before. It's there to give a sense of direction to the Welsh education system, pointing it in a direction, but not to direct the Welsh education system in terms of the what should happen on a day-to-day basis, or creating the basis for an accountability system. Where we are just now, and I think both Scotland and Wales are now actually broadly in the same position. I think both are well placed to build forward for different reasons and in a different way, and both are well placed to learn from each other. There will be a need, there is a need to focus on purpose, to focus on what matters, and to be clear about that. That's very much at the heart of the Welsh reforms. I very much hope that the commitment to look at the curriculum, which was in the manifestos of the major parties, will lead to the similar kind of focus and purpose in Scotland. The flexibility, the belief, the trust and flexibility that has been established or is being pursued in Wales, and is also very much was the policy of the last Scottish government, and I've no reason to believe it won't continue to be the policy of the incoming minister, who may be the same minister or somebody different. We'll have to find that out. We do need, both countries need to invest in their educators. They need to be very, very single-minded about ensuring that we protect the space for teachers to learn and grow throughout their careers. The context that we're talking about in terms of empowerment at a local level, allied to the scale and pace of change that's taking place in society, will require teachers who can reinvent themselves throughout their careers. Teaching will not be the same in 10 years' time or 20 years' time as it is just now. The nature of what it means to be a teacher will change, and we need to invest in teachers in order to allow that to happen. We need to ensure we've got intelligent accountability that ensures that young people are not being let down, but which reinforces and encourages good behaviours, positive behaviours, rather than encouraging perhaps negativity in the system. All of that, I think, is about creating a learning culture. That's what Wales is trying to do. It's trying to create a culture within which learning is the driver of quality in the system, learning at all levels. And I think, as I said, I think both Scotland and Wales can work together so that learning is not within one country, but the learning actually can happen across both countries. Now, I'm as nervous as you are to hear what the three heads are going to say, because I've said what I think is the intention in Wales, but of course they'll tell you about the reality of trying to turn ambition into reality. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. And that's been absolutely brilliant, because one of the things that Graham's done with that, I think, is established a real line of continuity and consistency. So many of the things that we've talked about in Scotland over a number of years, self-evaluation, lots of the changes that Graham talked about, still link in to what's happening both here and in Wales. And it's that importance of getting all of that translated into some kind of reality. And I have to say, Graham, before we move on to see what the heads are going to say, one of the most striking things for me was when we organised an event some years ago and brought colleagues from all four parts of the United Kingdom together to discuss what we were doing in each part of the country. And every single colleague from Wales who was there knew you by your first name, addressed you by your first name, included you in conversations, and it gave that sense of agency, of building from the bottom up. And hopefully that will be echoed by Kat Kucia, whom I'm delighted to see. She was just checking on her 9.5-year-old, who I have to say has been bribed with the promise of McDonald's and McFlurry. So questionable parenting there. But Kat will tell you a bit about herself and her background. I've had a couple of conversations with Kat, and I've just been absolutely blown away by the energy, by the commitment, and by the vision that Kat has. And similarly with Ty Golding, they're going to do a bit of a double act. Ty has just really upped the stakes in terms of banter throughout the preparation for this. He's done a really good job in both raising and lowering the tone, and I hope that he'll continue to do that tonight. Both colleagues with a primary background, both functioning head teachers, using the term functioning loosely, and I'm now simply going to pass over to you guys and let you take it away.
Thank you, David. Again, equally as colourful an introduction there as Graham got. Just as a means of formality, as David has said, my name's Ty Golding. I'm a head teacher, currently across 2 schools in Wales. I too, like Julian, am from the valleys, grew up on a slightly tougher council estate than Julian. Is not competitive, I know that, but Julian's altitude growing up was only 230 feet, whereas I grew up in a little town called Bargoed, which sits at over 650 feet. So my paper rounds were a lot colder, they were a lot wetter, and they were certainly a lot windier than yours, Julian. So I aspired to go to Christ y Ciliog. Really, a little bit of a background around me. You know, I said grew up in a small valleys town, and Julian hit it on the money, really. It's about learning and education as a route and as a real sort of motivator, but not just the motivation, it's actually the pathway that leads you sort of both from where you start and ultimately, as I'm getting a little bit older, back to where you came from as well. And I think that really picks up on Graham's sort of, you know, talking about purpose. I went to, you know, small primary school. My father, my family worked down the mines. Unfortunately, Margaret Thatcher put paid to that. We ended up living in South Africa for several years. After that experience, we came back and I found myself as a young man joining the army. And from that, again, always looking for experience and opportunity. It's from there that I sort of left and got myself and found myself very much into teaching and learning based upon some experiences of supporting the children in the forces, really, in a former job. And since being in teaching, I have worked across a number of primary schools, from what I would class as extremely affluent areas to extremely sort of challenging areas as well, and areas of high deprivation. I was initially involved in developing a national platform, which, you know, at the time was following, I believe, the GLOW system, but actually has taken a life of its own and has actually become a hugely purposeful provision across Wales for free access and support for digital learning for all learners, called Hub. I then had a role working on policy and curriculum design, and Graham had to put up with me for just over 2 years on that. And now it's easily described as what I'm doing is I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and I'm back in school, really trying to make and take opportunity to be creative with this curriculum and make it work in a real context.
I think there's a pause there for me to jump in. So I've already warned Ty that he's got to let me speak, because when we do this double act, quite often I'm left to what he says is say the prayer at the end. So I'm going to get in while I can. Thanks for the introduction, David. I have bribed my 9-year-old with a McDonald's and an extra McFlurry if she's really good. And we do have a 3.5-month-old kitten. So if you do see my head bopping up or down, or if I suddenly scream, it's because I've been clawed by Luna, the kitten. So a little bit about me. I have Scottish blood in me, you'll all be pleased to know, the Celts amongst us. My nana was a Glaswegian lady. She moved down to Wales, emigrated, as she said, in those days, in the 60s. And she actually lived in Wales longer than Scotland, but never lost her accent or her passion for being Scottish. So I've definitely got that within me. I haven't had as a colourful experience growing up as Ty has. I was educated in Newport in South Wales and still a Newport girl. David is right in terms of you don't mess with me. I think sometimes the Newport girl in me comes out. But I'm very proud to live in Newport. It's a very interesting city to live in. It often gets very bad press as a South Wales place to live, but I love it and I'm very passionate. And I think what's helped me in my career and my journey is always being about learning and always having people around me supporting me to learn. That includes my father, who gave up a very good job when I was younger to go and train to be a Baptist minister, much to the shock of us all, and him, you know, changing lives and that type of thing. And I've always had that instinct and sort of instilled in me to just to strive to want to do more. I actually did a psychology degree and didn't want to be a teacher back when I was 18, but very quickly changed my mind, and I became an infant school teacher. So my passion is in sort of the early years. But what I really came very quickly to understand was I had a bigger passion, and my bigger passion was to inspire others and was to become a leader. And I actually became a deputy head after 3.5 years of teaching in a very large school. You can imagine the raised eyebrows. You can imagine some of the older members of staff were probably older than my mum was at the time, saying, what on earth is this young whippersnapper coming in? Who does she think she is? And I had to win hearts and minds. And I actually then spent 11 years as a deputy, and many people would say that that's a long time to stay as a deputy, but actually what I had the fortunate experience of doing was learning my craft, and that has definitely stood me in good stead for what I'm doing now. I've worked with Welsh Government in an advisory capacity, both with digital learning, with Hub, as Ty mentioned, and with curriculum assessment and professional learning. And then in September 2017, I had the most amazing opportunity to open a brand new school and start my first headship. So I don't know, Charlotte, if you can put the slides up. So as you can see on the screen there, I think fundamentally, and this is picking up on Julian, something you said, and what Graham said, and for me, it's always about my why. And why do I do what I do? And you can see my school on the left there, Jubilee Park Primary School. And for me, it's about igniting a passion for learning. And that really does drive everything that I do as a person, as a mum, as a head teacher, and within the profession that I'm in. Give you a little bit of background for my school, an incredible experience. We were a brand new school. Opened in September 2017 on a housing estate, a brand new housing estate on the west side of Newport, probably classed as a more affluent area in Newport. And I think predominantly you would look at the makeup of my school and think it was a very middle class school. However, the need and the vulnerability within the school is quite stark. We had, when we opened, 118 pupils and 16 staff. And now 3.5 years later, we're up to 356 pupils and 44 staff. So you can imagine the rapid growth that's entailed over the last few years. I've had the unique opportunity of actually appointing every single member of staff that has come into my school. So, you know, you can blame me or it could be great, and it has worked both ways. But one thing I've been really keen on doing right from the beginning was to challenge thinking. And I think it's really important at this point to say that Graham mentioned the pioneer school, schools that are in Wales. We're not a pioneer school. We weren't a pioneer school. And what we did have, though, and what I've had the privilege of doing, is working alongside Graham and colleagues in Welsh Government and actually being part of national reform from the inside, and then actually being able to translate that. So right from the very, very beginning, we were focused at Jubilee Park on creating ourselves as a learning organisation. It might sound really funny saying that, because you would expect schools to be focused on learning, but so often schools are not. And so often schools are focused on the wrong things. So that was my keen focus right from the beginning, igniting that passion for learning and making sure learning was the focus, and learning not just for the children, but for the whole school community as well. So we focus a lot on the language that we use. And again, Graham, you mentioned that use of language being so important. And I think even now, everything that we do when we're talking about our school and the things that we do in our school, we really focus on that use of language. For example, our leaders are learning leaders. We don't have performance management. We have performance development, because I don't believe I'm there to manage people. I believe that myself and my leaders are there to develop people. We have professional learning and development, because it is the mixture of the two. And we really do try to not just use the buzzwords of creativity and innovation, but really drive deeper into making ourselves understand what those actually mean. So at Jubilee Park, one of the biggest things that we developed right at the beginning was our vision principles. And again, I didn't want to have a vision statement, as schools have, that sits on my website or goes in a prospectus and it's not lived and breathed in a school, because to me it's just a waste of time. So we developed 3 vision principles, and they really are the strategic purpose for our schools. So we have igniting a passion for learning, funny enough, creating the conditions to thrive, and growing together with the community. And all of that has really helped us to develop our approach and our curriculum offer based on the recommendations that Graham wrote in Successful Futures, and now based on the new curriculum for Wales as well. I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to hand over to Ty.
Thanks, Kat. Well, you know, when Kat and I were discussing this, I think what stood out for us is that our schools are very different, actually, and our journeys are very different, and our why is slightly different as well. Neither the statement that you see above the picture of Kat's school on the left in front of you, or the statement above my school on the right, are our school mottos or aims. They're actually our reasons, as she said, for what we do, our why. And mine in Welsh is Ybaw Gyfle. And the reason that it is that is because that was actually my secondary school motto growing up. And loosely translated, it translates to all their chance. And that's my why. You know, my why is about making sure that every person has the equity of provision and the equity of opportunity and experience that, you know, that education needs to provide in order to lift the lid for all the learners, really, as it did for myself. So, you know, just looking at my school wasn't brand new build in the way that it was a brand new school. It was an amalgamation of two older schools that were sort of bulldozed, if you like, overnight and brought together. So I wasn't in a position where I recruited for the school. It was about bringing a community together, or two communities together. And if you think about the three key foci of Graham's preamble, really, I think purpose, culture, and learning organisation stood out for me, and I think you're going to hear that a lot now in the next sort of 10 minutes from Kat and myself. The purpose was strong in order to bring these communities together and put something new in place. The culture was actually an absolute priority, and we really needed to come together in order, as Kat said, to refocus upon learning. And it does sound silly when you say that as a head teacher, but it is, there's nothing truer than that, really. And so that's where we are as a school. Our three kind of pinpoint foci for the school for us is actually our school motto in Ysgol y Ddraig is achieve, challenge and enjoy. And as a new school, we had the luxury of that being developed by the wider community and the children. And I actually think very insightful as well. It was very fortunate that it came up with an acronym as well that of ACE. And it's something that we use quite a lot, really. And it's all about that cultural drive, reminding children about, the purpose and the culture around achieving and being challenging themselves and others. But most importantly, it's about enjoying. And I don't mean fun in the trite, superficial sense of learning should be fun, because actually a lot of learning isn't always fun. But when I mean enjoy as in relationships and enjoy being part of the community. And we talk about enjoying being part of Llantwit Major, being part of Wales, and being part of a wider global community as well. So, I think we've got contrasting journeys there. I think we've got, quite different whys. But when Kat and I work together, and we do very often, and as is always the case, I think, and Graham talked about, false dichotomies in education. What is always the case that I found is that there are many more similarities when you get together and you talk about things than the differences that sort of drive between us. So thank you. Charlotte, if you could switch the slide, that would be grand.
Okay, so again, you can see on this slide our focus being that we are learning focused, and I think the cogs that you can see there really sort of spell out exactly what we try to aim to do, both within my school at Jubilee Park and I know Ty does both in his schools, and that's that we don't see things separate. We don't have a vision statement that sits there and it doesn't mean anything. We don't have a curriculum which is there to tick the boxes, and we don't have professional learning which are one-off events. It's really important that we see vision, curriculum, professional learning all working as one. You can't have one working without the other. And I think at Jubilee Park, what we've been really focused on is developing our Thrive curriculum. And our Thrive curriculum and our purpose for our Thrive curriculum is for children to be able to thrive in a transforming world. And I think we can all agree on that, particularly over the last year. And it's really focused on the needs of our children. So we don't have any set schemes of work. We don't have anything that's sort of regurgitated year after year. This is what you do in year 3 in the summer term. Everything is bespoke to the needs of the children. The children work with the teachers. It's not a child-led curriculum, and I think there's a lot of myths around there as the curriculum for Wales is child-led, and it's not. And actually the teachers work very hard to articulate their why for their themes and to really develop the learner capacities and that notion of inquiry with the children. For me, a curriculum and assessment also work as one together. It's not an either or, and it's not one feeding the other. We don't have set metrics. We've got rid of outcomes and levels and using all of those set metrics that were a comfort blanket for my staff. And this has been very, very hard to move away from these set metrics of assessment. But what we really focus on is progress. And you can see on the slide there, we talk around that word progression and really trying to understand what is progression in learning and what does it look like? What does it actually mean for our school? For us, the process has been absolutely crucial, and I just wanted to pick up on 3 words which have probably guided the process and still guiding what we do now, and it's about clarity, making sure every single person in our school is clear about what is expected and that they all know it goes back to the why and what we're about as a school. Communication, and again, we don't waste any time. We don't have staff meetings where we talk about diary dates. We don't have a board in the staff room which things get written up on. We use technology really effectively to communicate those things, but actually we do it in a very creative way, and then it's about us constantly refining that. We also talk a lot about pace and talk about a slowness to learning and making sure that we have a spiral approach. So we're making sure that learning is put at a deeper level. There's nothing wrong with children redoing the same thing, maybe from year 3 to year 6, as long as that learning is taken to a deeper level. And ultimately, professional learning allows us the time and the space for practitioners. And when I say practitioners, I mean our teachers and our TAs. And that's something, again, that we've put a lot of time and emphasis on in our school, that we really have teachers and TAs acting as one and having the same professional learning. And that has been really, really important for us to secure our vision and to be able to work together to ensure that our children really do thrive.
Thanks, Kat. And picking up on that, really, it is about picking up from the systemic trust and professional ownership that we've been given in our curriculum, and making sure that that's passed down into the systems in school. With that agency, if you like, and that trust in the system does come what I can only describe as quite a set of heavy lifting. And Kat and I will talk to you about that in a moment. But what also comes with that kind of ability to be creative as professionals, I think, is a huge responsibility too. And I don't think we should shy away from, as school leaders, working with our staff and our communities, we shouldn't shy away from either the heavy lifting or the responsibility. And I think with that, we'll talk to you about where we're going with that in schools in a moment. But, looking at that sort of little box on the right there around the 6 Ps, that's what sort of keeps me true, I think, and keeps my integrity on course. Picking up on the purpose, not just the purpose, if you like, of education, because there's a big discussion there around meaningful education, around what's important, particularly relevant to our curriculum, what matters, with that actually being one of the mechanistic parts, if you like, of our curriculum, but really around sort of the purpose and the 4 purposes that Graham talked about, but the actual purpose of what we are serving, not just nationally, but locally. And I think that's hugely important, that we don't lose sight of that translation between what's expected and what we should be providing across a nation, but what we should be providing in a local context in our community. Process for me is always king, and I could go on about it, and Kat and I talk about this at length. For me, having ownership and greater autonomy and agency, if you like, around curriculum and responsibilities we've got to be creative has to give us the opportunity to move away from curriculum as a product. Very much the work that we've done, it has to be about process. Curriculum, if you consider it, it's a socially constructed element, isn't it? Curriculum in Wales now is everything that we do, not just from the moment they walk in to the moment they walk out of the building, but beyond, in order to set them up as well and steer them in that right direction. And if you look at that transaction, that social construction, it has to prioritize process before developing and achieving a project, and actually always develop and go back to and put the process first. It's about progression for us. As Graham talked about, it was a step away from levels. And over the wall and over the dike here in England, life after levels caused quite a ripple. And it's about to cause that ripple here in Wales as well, and I'm not naive about that, because very much the system needs something to replace that. What we've got so far is quite an intelligent assessment guidance nationally, but again, it's going to need interpretation, it's going to need collaboration, and it's going to need a big national dialogue around how that works in practicality. It's about, for us and me in school really as well, ultimately considering and going with the fact that pedagogy, it's huge. Pedagogy is what we do, and it's that is the dynamic between learner and learning, teacher and teaching, and the relationships across all 4 of those. But it's something that I think for a long time we've taken for granted, and has been historically driven in Wales, and it's something that we haven't openly talked about. It was probably talked around, around small tables behind closed doors. And what we are seeing now is a very open and beneficial discussion happening in that. And for the first time as a head in 11 years of headship, this year and last year during the pandemic, teachers and learning support assistants were approaching and engaging with me with their own concept and driving pedagogical discussion, which to me, hugely important. And Kat has said another thing that I'm a big advocate around, and we're not just talking a national level here, but in school, is that the success of this curriculum in Wales will very much depend upon a number of aspects. And one of those you can see over on the left-hand side, and it's on my 6Ps there, is professional learning. The quality, okay, the expectation and the provision that you create in a school around professional learning will determine the level of success of that curriculum at an operational level, as well as ultimately as part of a wider system. And you know, we can't get away from it. There's one reason that we do what we do, and it's to make sure that the practice we do is effective, you know, and it has an effect, if you like, and that's really what it is about for me. And it's taking those national ideals and making that work. And like Kat, we prioritise professional learning. We don't have staff meetings as such. We don't talk about what we call colloquially in my local cluster as bogs, budgets and boilers, because actually you can spend all your professional career in focusing upon that. And we tend to put all the effort, and we create the space, because you have to take the responsibility for creating the space. We create our own space for professional learning. And at the moment, professional learning is focused upon nothing but the routines and the processes moving towards reform and realising that. Not as an agenda for realising or implementing, as it were, somebody else's product, but actually realising it in ourselves, in our everyday actions and our everyday beliefs as practitioners, and a reminder of why we do what we do every single day. And it can get tiresome when I hear my own voice in school saying that, and I'm sure, no doubt, my staff will agree. However, I think as a leader, that's part of the role and the responsibility that we've got. Kat, did you want to pick anything up, or are we good to move on?
No, I've been messaging you saying move on, actually. So if we have the next slide, Charlotte.
I've been ignoring you.
You can carry on, Ty. This is your time.
Yeah, and you know, everything I've talked about, the ideology and what you've heard from Graham, you know, and the reality check from David there, and you know, Julian talking about the work that he does, is very much trenched in where we are, because unless we've got an understanding of where we are, where we've been, what we can't do in a school is sort of try and create that, you know, that new reality, if you like, that new truth. And for us, you know, the current intention in the system that we exist in, albeit we've only got 18 months left in this current system, was very much based around measure, compare and judging. And you can see that the behaviours and the honest behaviours that we've had as head teachers, and I'll be the first to hold my hand up, is it delivered me into a world of gaming and competition. And all I wanted to do as a head was lead a school that was better than the school down the road. And there's a fundamental flaw in that for a number of reasons that I don't need to highlight. It was about complying with policy, and it was about taking something off the back of a lorry and opening up and following it, you know, by rote, and making sure that there was adherence, you know. And we need to be very careful with that, because, you know, when it deprofessionalizes us as teachers, and it makes us very much dependent upon spoon feeding, and that is a dangerous path to go down. You know, the current intention was about support and collaboration, but I don't think that was realised, you know, at an operational level. And I think what that did, it took the school organisational competition and gaming down to a teacher and classroom competition and gaming. And unfortunately, there was a disconnect between that intention and the reality for a number of reasons, and probably by, I think, a heavy punch and accountability system. You know, overly prescribed content, which drove our learning and teaching, you know, what we had to cover and when we covered it, you know. And if I walked into any primary school in Wales in the last 10 years, I could tell you that in year 4 in the autumn term, they'd either be doing the Celts or they'd be doing the Vikings. And I'm not saying they wouldn't be doing that very well, because there's a place in the world for Celts and Vikings. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. However, it's not in year 4 on a wet Wednesday in October every single year. It's not about being driven by purpose in that respect, because that is being driven by content and diktat. It's about standardised flight paths, the current intention, and everybody we've got in Wales has got this expectation that everybody in Wales needs to go up 2 sub-levels of progress in a year. Now, we don't really know where that's come from, but basically it's over detail, and if you like, that spiral of specificity that I know in Scotland you would have heard about, in that expectation that, you know, if children are expected to move up a level for the system, what are they expected to move up in a term, and in a week, in a day, in an hour? And then you get this real nonsense around micromanagement about progress over a 50-minute lesson. You know, yes, you might have progress and you might move from point A to point B in a lesson, but actually progress, I think we need to take a step back and very much look at the bigger picture really around what we're doing with regards to progression rather than minute progress. Our current system really does only provide a pathway to quals. Our content on curriculum from 14 to 16, I would argue, and Richard will talk about this in more depth, he's the expert, but I would argue are dangerously light. And we've had the backwash of qualification specification driving learning and teaching for a lot longer than we should have. And what we really need to do now is move towards what Graham talked about, is a greater level of sophistication and making sure that quals meets the needs of curriculum and not the other way around. And the other thing that what we've got the opportunity to be creative for us in school, and it's a license for us to think differently, and particularly what Julian said around Ken Robinson and moving away from that factory model, that production model T Ford child, which is not why I got into the game, and it's not why I am where I am from my own learning, is around removing, if you like, the specificity around age-related expectations. It has to be broader. It has to be about lowering that floor, raising that ceiling, but it has to be about, one thing for me that always sort of reeks of all of this is that those closest to the problems are the ones that come up with the best solutions. And it's about inclusion and collaboration on that front as well. So thank you, Charlotte.
So I think what Ty and I wanted to do at this point was to then look at, okay, this is the system that we've been in, and this is the system that for many schools in Wales, they're still grappling with a lot of those realities. And I think what Ty and I have been able to do is, like he said, put our money where our mouth is and actually try and look at this new way and try and be creative and be brave. So where are we going? And I think the outcome of all of this and the outcome of all the processes and activities that we have put in place in our schools over the last couple of years has been that it is a definite process and it's not a product. You will never come to my school and see an off-the-shelf product. We're constantly learning, we're constantly changing, and it's all about that process. And for me, I go back to that culture of learning, and that goes back to our why and our vision. And it starts with creative leadership and a brave leadership, and making sure that that culture of learning is for everybody. We talk a lot around our environment for learning, our behaviour for learning, and like Ty said, that curriculum isn't just something that happens in the classroom. Learning happens all the way through your schools. And I think for us over the last year, in that change and that real massive shock to everybody about lockdown and change to blended learning, online learning, that was a real test for us as a school. And I think what we actually were able to do was to maintain those 6 Ps that Ty talked about earlier. And actually we've grown stronger together. And I think it's something that goes back to that culture of learning, because our why is so strong, because we constantly go back to articulating that. We've been able to grow through something that has been has a huge impact on our school. Relationships.
Sorry, can I just to jump in there really? And it is important that Kat's talking about a culture here, and it's important that what we are sort of prescribing and what we've done with our teams is not an ethereal culture that's sort of a helium balloon floating above your school. We've gone forward and we've defined this. And Kat's talked about a couple of them, but just as a practical point for everyone, really, for us, the culture is around 8 elements, and it picks up environment for learning, the language of learning, modeling learning, expectations for learning, relationships for learning, opportunities and time for learning, and then finally routines for learning. So we're not just talking, if you like, in sort of a highfalutin sort of manner about these things that don't exist. These are genuine structures that are underpinned by evidence, by research, and by literature that we build and we develop with our practitioners through our PL. Sorry, Kat.
All right, I am used to him, betting in and saying things, but I suppose it was purposeful. So the other thing that we're really good at doing, and I think is something that's absolutely key, is building relationships. The OECD in their School as Learning Organisation model talk around 4 transversal themes, and those be interest, time, thinking together, and technology. And I fundamentally believe those 4 things have been the driver for my school development over the last 4 years. That we put time in for professional learning. We've built that trust. We've had that time for collaboration, and not just collaboration as in, we've shared books with each other in in a professional learning session, true collaboration where we're inquiring about a problem, solving problems as staff working together. I don't profess to be the person that knows everything in my school, absolutely not. I learn from everybody within my school community. I'm still learning. I've gone back to university, we just handed assignments in over the weekend, studying for a doctorate, and part of that work that I'm looking at is collaborative inquiry for teachers and how that can enhance teacher well-being. And I think it's so important that as leaders we understand relationships being the key focus of our why. Communication, again, being really key, and having that clear, open and honest communication. My staff, as I said it in a very uncommunicative way then, my staff will often say, and particularly staff that have come from other schools and experienced teachers, and they'll say everything we do in our school is meaningful and related. And I think that's so good to hear as a head teacher, that I say no to things. If it doesn't impact on my teaching or it doesn't impact on the children, we do not do it. And yes, we come across things. Yes, we have, accountability structures from the middle tier that ask us to do things, but I will say no. And I will say no because fundamentally, if it doesn't go back to my why, then we're not doing it as a school. And then it goes back to that purpose and staying true to our why. And one of the things that a comment that's often made, and it's something that I love the sound of, is the word slowliness. I've been part of the rat race, 11 years as a deputy head in an excellent school, a school that, again, it was an amalgamation going into a brand new build. And I was part of creating a bit of a monster there because we wanted to be bigger and better. And like Ty talked about that gaming. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having that ambition and wanting to be excellent. I mean, Scotland, you have your curriculum for excellence. That's absolutely right. But actually what I didn't do and what I didn't lead by example was stepping back and just allowing that time and space for myself as a teacher and as a leader, and that time and space for children to learn and enjoy learning. And I think fundamentally then that comes back to well-being, and that's had a huge impact on staff, making sure our why is focused on learning and creativity, professional learning, keeping on learning, and that's driven all our behaviours and our collective action. And I think, once you have that why, and I go back to mine, that igniting a passion for learning, and that really does, come through. And I think that is the proof in the pudding of what Graham was able to put in place, and those recommendations put in place to Wales. And often we'll say, I get the question, well, what happens now? We're going through a massive change in Wales. We've got a new education minister. We're going to have, we've got some new people at the top in Welsh government. There's going to be a new head of the inspectorate. What will happen if they change everything? Fundamentally, I won't change, because I fundamentally believe what I'm doing is right for my children in my community. Yes, I might have to twist things to meet some structures that if that's forced upon me, but I will not change what I'm about and what we do in our school, because I can see that it works.
Just picking up, Kat, looking at the chat, and how some people have quite rightly pointed out that how often creativity sits along bravery. And I have to agree with that, because you've just articulated that in a huge way, A system, and I said it once, and I'm not going to sort of shy away from repeating it, will live and die on three things. And that will be accountability, it will be the quality of leadership, and it will be professional learning. Okay, and the quality of leadership is the one that needs unpacking. As David has quite rightly said, it's as important to say yes as it is to say no. And brave leaders will be successful leaders. And it's about keeping that, the floodgate, closed from the outside world, which again is the accountability, which in itself then comes back to that professional learning, and that's part of the process there. Should we move on, Kat?
Yep.
So very quickly, it's a horrible monster of a diagram, and Kat and I don't like it, but it's actually draft one from a long time ago. And when you're presented with a curriculum and a reform system that says, here we go, it's over to you guys, what are you going to do about it? The first thing I suggested to Kat was, I like a process more than anyone, and I like process more than anything. So we started to sit down, and you can see there at the top that you've seen it. Actually, that's the third time the word has been appearing in this slideshow. It was on slides 3, 5 and 6, the word purpose, and it ran right through everything we've said before. Creativity, it needs to be based upon purpose, and that bravery. And for us, those steps kind of suggest it's linear. It's not, actually. There's a lot of concurrentness existing within that, and sort of simultaneous action. But the easiest way to describe it to colleagues, if you like. So this was our beginning of curriculum thinking for dummies, if there were a better word. My cluster colleagues won't mind me calling them dummies. I've done that a few times to their faces. But and I mean that in the nicest way, you know, it's about moving people, isn't it, and getting them to know about curriculum in order that they can understand how to do it. So it starts with the vision and the purpose and the things we've talked about now and the national kind of prescription. It then works into a process whereby you need to decide what that looks like in your school, what's important for your learners, what's important for your community, what quite rightly, in your case, enables at the age of 16 those learners to demonstrate those capacities in the best and most effective manner. And if you like, could you draw a gossamer thread between what you provide in your school all the way through to the kind of people you want to exist in society in Scotland? And that's what you have to do. That's part of the heavy lifting that I talked about. And when you pull that string at the age of 16, that learner should be able to look right back down that transversely and see every step that got them there. You know, it's about understanding, for us, the principles of progression and how children learn, but how we advance learning as well. And that is fundamental. Graham talked about some of the mechanics around AOLEs and what matters. Step 4, you can see that, you know, we've got 5 progression steps at various ages, but those ages are really broad, you know, and we are looking at sort of 3-year spaces between those ages all the way through, apart from the qualifications landscape at PS4 and 5 at the top. It's about taking back down to a planning level then and really unpicking what pedagogy and learning looks like for real people doing real jobs in real classrooms. Not about us talking about it here, you know. It's about bringing assessment in, and only then bringing assessment in, because we both believe assessment needs to come as a servant of learning, not the other way around. And then for us, it's out of assessment and that birth of genuine community-based curriculum that you decide what intervention. I don't mean talking just ALN or SEN intervention. I'm talking about interventions in a kind of change manner as well for professionals, what support, performance development, as Kat said, over performance management. And then ultimately then it's about how you progress that yourself and report on that as a system. So, you know, it's hugely important. I tell you what, the iterations that have been born from this have been in their thousands. And we're currently...
Or I should say professional discussions that we've had over it as well.
Yeah, we you know, and genuinely we've spent hours with staff, with ourselves, with our cluster schools. One thing I will say to you, and it's part of those 8 elements I talked to you about, the culture of learning, which incidentally are based on some work out of Harvard by Ron Reichart, which he sort of talks around the 8 forces of cultures in schools. One of those things is time. It's time that underpins, time and space that underpins the concept of slowliness. And that's really key that we pick up on that. So thank you, Charlotte.
And I think just to end, one of the things that Ty and I constantly do is that collaborating. You know, we were both, I speak on behalf of Ty now, but we're both delighted to be asked to join you all this evening. I think I would have preferred a nice little trip up to Edinburgh if I'm being really picky. But, you know, it is about keeping on collaborating and keeping on learning. This is a fantastic network that you've got, and it's a privilege to be here tonight and just to share, you know, a glimpse into the lives of what we're doing in Wales as well. You can see the word on the screen there, Cynefin. And that's something that really is at the heart of our curriculum in Wales, and something there's actually not, I Googled it earlier, my Welsh isn't the best, that's what you get for having an English father and a Scottish mother, but it actually doesn't translate directly. And what it talks about it is that place where people feel that they belong, and people having that landscape that is familiar, and that we're shaped by what's happened in the past, but we're also ready to shape the future. And I think fundamentally, you know, that's what we're trying to do as professionals, and you know, in a very exciting time. Ty, I'll leave you to finish.
Quite literally, it means habitat, but actually conceptually, what it means is that place where it all happens and your very essence comes alive because you are connected to where you are and what you do. And I suppose to me, it's our Welsh Celtic version of it takes a village to raise a child. That's what it means to me. Okay, and you know, let's not lose sight of that. And then shameless plug there on the right. Yeah. Kat and I run our own network in Wales called Network Ed. We started it born out the frustration of the lack of PL across the country. We run weekly chats, we host events, we connect people, we point people in directions, and we very much use social media as an easy and a lazy man's way of doing the footwork, you know, and moving the ball around the pitch a bit in education here in Wales. So thank you very much. And I hope it's been useful in some way, but please follow up on anything you need to.
Very quickly going to cut in because I'm conscious that we've still got to hear from Richard, who will now be spared a colourful introduction because we're under a bit of pressure for time, and we've still got Hywel to come as well. Richard has been just as stimulating and exciting in the conversations we've had leading up to this, and I'll say no more than that. I'm just delighted to have you with us, Richard. So from a secondary perspective.
Great, and thanks for the invite to be here tonight. I'm not going to run through a rich and worthy CV. I started off as a failed poet, and I was tempted into teaching by the promise of a £4,000 golden hello. But once I was in the classroom teaching English, for those of you that know the Blood Axe New Poetry Anthology, the poets in there, Jeff Hattersley, Salima Hill, absolutely grabbed me, and I haven't looked back. So just brief summary of my experience. I've worked across 3 different contrasting schools in different leadership positions, and I had 10 years moving between Swansea schools. And I think I was about 10 years into my career where I had one of those moments where I sort of saw things being written out in front of me a little bit, probably had a crisis, and decided to take a brief sabbatical from teaching and from leadership. I was fortunate enough to get an Arts Council grant to go back to being a failed poet. I did write a few poems during 6 months away from school, but I also thought a lot about learning and leadership and actually what I stood for. And it was on returning from the sabbatical that I think I really found my mojo. I took up a post working with Welsh Government as an advisor. A hugely beneficial experience to see different parts of education in Wales and, of course, beyond Wales as well. And then from Welsh Government, I've come to where I'm sat now, which is in head teacher's office here in Ysgol Calon Cymru. I took up post as head here in January 2020. So 14 months in. It's great to be able to share where we were, where we're at, and where we hope to go as well in the future. So Charlotte, if you could pop up the PowerPoint. Brilliant. So a little bit about our school. I think the context is important. Graham mentioned our school in his introduction. We're a school that has had challenges, and you can see some of those challenges just bullet pointed there on the screen in front of you. We were formerly 2 secondary schools, both in and out of special measures. Large high turnover of head teachers. I think on last count early this morning, both the schools had 10 head teachers over the last 12 years. You can imagine the reverberations of that sort of unsteadiness in leadership. Well, in 2018, both Wells and Llandrindod High School were closed and reopened as Ysgol Calon Cymru. It's fair to say it was a challenging closure. Obviously, I wasn't here at the time, but I can still feel the ripples of it here in school at the moment. So it was a forced merger, caused a lot of upset at the time, which of course makes it difficult when a school then needs to embrace a new curriculum. Leadership and recruitment challenges, deficit budget challenges carried on in the opening of the new school. But we're settling now and we're starting to find our feet. So a bit about our school. We're a dual site school, 2 campuses, both 7 miles apart. We've got a Welsh medium stream down here on the Both campus and an autistic spectrum disorder centre based on our Llandrindod campus. We've got 13 feeder primaries, which comes with its challenges, fantastic opportunities, but also challenges. And you can see there the numbers of our learners and the numbers of our staff. Just to give you a little insight into our schools, they're very different. The Builth Wells catchment is a more affluent catchment, and our Llandrindod catchment, although based in rural Wales, is in the 20 to 30% most deprived in Wales. So there's real challenges in aligning the 2 campuses and the needs of the 2 campuses. And really, this has been our starting point when we've been looking at Curriculum for Wales. How do we turn what potentially could have been seen, in all honesty, by our school as a threat into a real opportunity? So just want to spend a bit of time telling you how we've done that. Charlotte, next slide, please. So what have we been doing? It was really interesting back last January, listening to colleagues in the school talk about Curriculum for Wales. I heard things such as it's the Donaldson curriculum. I know Graham is in the room, but I'm going to say that. Staff saying, when's it coming? There was this sense that we were absolutely under siege by a new curriculum because the school wasn't ready. And you can see from our history why, because we've been externally scrutinised, we've been under threat. And what had happened over time, the school had battened down the hatches, innovation had decreased, we'd become risk averse, shy as an organisation and inward looking. So really, back last year in January, we sat down as a whole staff and we had a really frank whole staff conversation about the strengths of Ysgol Calon Cymru, but also what our weaknesses were. And out of that, we started to shape the beginning of a conversation around how we were going to change the culture here in school. Now, I felt this was really important. I didn't want the curriculum to be something forced upon our schools. So we knew as a leadership team, we had lots of work to do here with all of our staff to bring people along with us. You can see there down the right of the screen, some of the key focuses which we've had over the last 14 months. And our mantra all through the pandemic has been to look for the opportunities in it. One of the first things we did was to focus on the national mission and the bigger picture. The school had started to look inwards. It had fallen out of step with what was happening across Wales. So we had a real campaign on engaging people into the ambitions of Wales as a nation. I saw that really help teachers and our non-teaching staff increase their expectations, start to look outwards and see what we could be doing and what we could be doing differently. I'll pick out a couple other points from just the list down there on the right. I won't go through them all because I am conscious of time. But key for me is the reworking of evaluation for improvement. And colleagues have alluded to this at other points this evening. We're in a high stakes system. And it's really fair to say that secondaries in particularly had been, they sort of, they lived or died by really narrow performance measures. And when a school is under that sort of scrutiny, as you rob teachers of their autonomy. We've worked really hard in school here to introduce new evaluation for improvement arrangements. It's not about hard accountability. It's about broad judgments, collective responsibility, with all of our staff being involved in shaping their professional direction, the direction of our areas of learning and our whole school direction as well. So we're starting to see the tiny shifts, the little indications of innovation. I'm starting to see a movement where we have a culture which isn't based on top-down accountability or permission, the sort of culture that we need in order to make the most of the opportunities that we've got at the moment. Aligned with that, it was a focus on staff well-being. We needed to get the ground right, the ground beneath our feet right. And I felt the school was malnourished. And we've fed staff, we've grown staff, we've grown leadership, we've grown professional learning in school. And you can feel growing teacher agency. And as a leadership team and with our middle leaders across the school and colleagues from across our cluster, we've been really carefully judging when to introduce a conversation around curriculum. I wanted it to be seen as an opportunity rather than a threat. So over the last 7 or 8 months, we've started to develop our work around Curriculum for Wales. And I'll just let you know in the next slide, the beginnings of work in those areas. So, I'm not, a slide like the previous one makes culture change sound straightforward and as if it can happen overnight, and it really can't, and I think what our school is becoming really good at is listening and slowing and judging pace and making sure that we do things properly and that we don't rush. I know I've got an impatient streak, so we've got a fantastic team around us at the moment, and we speak really honestly to one another about our strengths and areas for development. And you can sense the whole school coming on board with a shared direction at the moment. So where are we at the minute in terms of creating the culture we need, using the opportunities that Curriculum for Wales affords us to also generate that culture? I had to press a sort of factory settings button, really. You know, you have to sometimes get that tiny little pin and find that tiny little button. And for me, that tiny little button in our school was getting the right people to have enough confidence to really share their views about where the school had been and where we needed to head. So our work around developing Curriculum for Wales really started with review and reflection. And we set up quite a formal network, really, to make sure that all of the views from across the school community were heard. And we set a tone where it was about embracing the wrong turns. And there'd been quite a few of them in different ways. One of the things that we saw, the school had restructured itself around Curriculum for Wales, but not knowing what it was restructuring to. So it was classic. It looked good on paper, but the reality in the ground was slightly different. So we started with a really frank and honest conversation about what we needed to do differently and what we could learn. And we saw something really interesting happening here in school. Not only were staff growing in confidence to speak out honestly, so it was a really great indication that the reluctance of staff to speak out in a previous culture, you know, we were starting to see green shoots of people having confident opinions and generating confident views. So we picked through what we'd previously done, what had worked well, and what we needed to develop. And it became really obvious really very quickly that, of course, all of this is about our learners. So we developed a school approach which was entirely led by the learners. And you'll see there the second point I've got. So we established an all-age learner group, and that was with us as the high school and all of our 13 feeder primaries. And we had some fantastic staff from across the cluster facilitate work with our learners to look at Curriculum for Wales, the sorts of learners that Curriculum for Wales was suggesting that they would become, and they interrogated, they pulled it apart, and they started to shape a learner vision for our whole cluster. And they did such a great job at that we then asked our pupils to lead our stakeholder engagement workshops. And we've quite systematically worked through all of our stakeholders, parents, carers, governors, our staff, of course, our wider community, and our pupils have led engagement workshops with those stakeholders. In those workshops, we've established the value of the core purposes. So I said about these review and reflection of what we'd done previously. We took a step back, which was quite hard for the school, really, because some people saw the step back as being a step back, and it wasn't a step back. It was just a, what have we learnt? How do we realign? And how does this contribute to the culture which we're generating, which is one of strategically exploring, making mistakes and taking risks and evaluating and pushing on our progress. So our pupil group, and I'm down into the mechanics of what we're doing now, our pupil group, after running the engagement workshops with all of our stakeholders, establishing the value of the core purposes, they then worked with our stakeholders to create a vision statement. And we've now got a really confident vision statement, which has been signed up to by all of our stakeholders and our cluster primaries as well. And it's not a particularly grand vision statement. It's a statement actually about how we need to explore, how we need to be brave. It's absolutely dead simple, but it is becoming our mantra. I was driving the other day over the Brecon Beacons. I live in Swansea and I commute here to Powys. and the Beatles were playing. Hey Jude was playing on, I can't remember the radio station, but Hey Jude was playing on the radio. And I always lose signal at the top of the Brecon Beacons. It's a fantastic point. Gorgeous views either side. It's a brilliant point just to pull over, breathe out, and kind of leave the day on the top of the mountain up there. But I lost Hey Jude at some point, but I carried on singing it in my head. Round a windy lane, across the top of the mountain. I came down the other side and I picked up the tune more or less spot on where it has been playing on the radio when I couldn't hear it. And there's a feeling in school at the minute, and that's not my analogy, that's somebody else's, but there's a feeling in school at the minute that the vision is there. And even if we can't hear the tune every day, we are all listening to the same melody, and that's a really encouraging point for our school to be at, considering where we were a couple of years back. So I'm really keen on saying things out loud and making public promises. So we've now committed to a collective development plan with our stakeholders and across all of our clusters. And you'll see that collective development plan there is based on professional learning communities. So we've got a group of colleagues looking at the different AOLEs. We've got a group looking at pedagogy, assessment progression, skills, the importance of authentic learning experiences, and then a group of middle leaders who are in our strategic leadership and engagement group. You know, I don't want our development as a cluster to be led by the head teachers. We've got to facilitate it and grow so that we make ourselves invisible, ready for the next generation of leaders coming through. So that really was a whistle-stop tour of our school, where we've been, the culture we're trying to create, which I just think is absolutely crucial to make sure that we do the best for our learners now and in the future. And this last slide, just going through some of the mechanics and logistics of how we were and how we're approaching it. So I suppose, without being too technical about it, I think, you know, one of the most important jobs of anybody in a school is to listen and to make sure that you've really got a sense of lots of different viewpoints and what's happening. And as school leaders, we calibrate, and we've got those people that we calibrate with. But I think at the moment, it's really fair to say in our school that there's a couple of things that I'm noticing that I feel are indications of the ambition of our school community, really. And that will be, there's a lightness of touch that I can sense. 2 to 3 years ago, there's a weightiness and a heaviness, and nobody really wants to come to work into a weighty and heavy environment. There's a lightness of touch, which is helping us take some complex ideas and make them really simple and communicate them well. You can sense a sense of humour running through our organisation at the moment, which is absolutely great. And we're seeing people wanting to come to work with us, which is really important because we need some fresh air to support all of this work. And I think, you know, there's a general spring in our step. You know, I'm tentative saying it, but there is a sense that the opportunities that the curriculum currently provides for us, it's exactly what we need to teach our way out of a situation that our school community has found itself in. So I think we're learning and we're reinventing ourselves. You know, here in Ysgol Calon Cymru at the moment, green shoots, but the future is feeling bright for us.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you so much for getting that done so quickly. That was brilliant. We're clearly overambitious for tonight, so I'm going to do something very unusual. I'm going to remind everybody that the next creative conversation will be on the 10th of June. And it will be an absolute celebration of practice that's partly been inspired by these conversations that we've had. We've got colleagues from schools in the areas that we serve coming back to talk about what you're doing in your schools, in your context. And having said that and invited you back for that, I'm actually going to let Hywel Roberts finish off tonight. The reason Hywel's here is because Hywel's been a consistent presence for us in these conversations. And he's given us a lot of messages which I think people have taken to heart. They've drawn on, they've engaged them with their schools right across this whole southeastern area. And what Hywel, I think, is able to do is look at what's happening in Wales, both from that perspective and also from the perspective of being involved in a different model of development in England. So Hywel, pull it together, mate. It's all yours.
Well, look, it's I've just written loads of stuff down tonight, and I'm very grateful to the other contributors, because I think everyone is going to have something to take away. So my humble offering, I'm going to try and keep it short, because I know people are going to have other places to go. But there's headlines for me, and I'm coming at this. You know, I'm sitting here in Yorkshire, and a lot of my work over, you know, all the lockdowns has been curriculum writing, curriculum support, working in classrooms side by side with teachers in Yorkshire, in Leeds, in city centre Leeds, in Barnsley, in poor parts of Sheffield, and trying to make sense of the should curriculum that we have in England, which is, this is what you have to do, the national curriculum. This is what you have to teach. Here it is. So we get that, and my role, I guess, in that sort of work is to sit with the teachers, is to sit with the leaders and ask them, what do you want for your children? We've got this that we've got to do, but what could we do with it? So we've got a should curriculum in England, but what we're grappling with now is how we interpret it place to place. And I'm taken by something that I think Ty or Kat said earlier about this, the community response to curriculum. Well, how does a school, Richard, you've just talked about it, how do you as a secondary school respond to the expectations, to the frameworks that you've been given? In England, we're just given a list of stuff we've got to teach, and it's slightly soul destroying. But the good news is, because I think England, I sometimes present it as a fairly bleak thing, the curriculum, but actually there's some green shoots, there's some light now, particularly as we come out of the lockdown, where we're now talking as schools around what do we value? What do we want for our children? We understand that they have to have critical knowledge. That's the should curriculum. They've got that critical knowledge. It's the knowledge that's been decided for them, which you don't have in Wales. You know, we can agree what the critical knowledge is in Wales and in Scotland, but in England, here is the knowledge. We then have the classical knowledge. So there's three elements to knowledge, essentially. We've got the critical, we've got the classical. So, you know, in city centre Leeds, with year 2, when we look out of the window, we want the children to distinguish between a magpie and a sparrow. Now, that's not been decided anywhere but by the teacher in the classroom. And it's the gift that we want to give our children. And then there's the community knowledge, the communal knowledge. These kids come with very negative community knowledge in some aspects. Some kids will arrive at class potentially already racist. You know, it's what they've come with, and they're 7. So what do we do with that? And how do we respect that child, but challenge that community knowledge? And that's the curriculum that's now sparking up the professional imagination of teachers in England. We've realized in England that we do have space to, if you like, play, experiment, innovate, and I'm going to use that C word, which I don't often use in England anymore. Be creative. I haven't done my CV. I went to Bretton Hall College. The alumni was Sir Ken Robinson, the League of Gentlemen, and Mark Thomas, the stand-up comic who I have a lot of time for. But my work now is around how do we get those powerful conversations happening in the classroom with a brew, you know, with a cup of tea, teacher to teacher. How do we inspire one another so that we move from being the effective practitioner, which is someone who gets it, is someone who understands what teaching is, can measure kids, can measure their performance, can do all that. That's being an effective teacher. But how do we move that good practitioner to being reflective, to being inquiring? and to being someone who will not just suck in the research, but will go and do the research themselves. And it's so heartening to hear from colleagues in Wales where that's happening. And I know colleagues in Scotland, that's what happens in up there. I'm based in Yorkshire. That transformative practice is what we're all reaching for. And it's lovely, Richard, to hear your story about your school, where those things are starting to happen. I've been working with schools with my brilliant colleague, Dr. Deborah Kidd. We've been working in Pembrokeshire. We've been working at Harry Tudor Secondary School and a school in Fishguard as well, looking at curriculum there. And the big thing that we've done, as well as embracing slowness, which I love, as well as taking our time because we've been given that time, we've been sitting in rooms discussing what our children need, but also, if you like, breaking the walls down so that the brilliant PE teacher who's sitting there, who's the spitter Ryan Giggs, he just wants to teach PE. He's even turned up to this professional meeting in a PE kit. But he now knows that one of his purposes now is to really, really go for it around health and well-being. And that actually the new remit is beautiful for his subject, which is PE. Those walls have gone. And that's the great thing that the Welsh curriculum enables. Now, I'm going to stop, but purpose. Thank you, Kat and Ty, for reminding us of that. Purpose is everything. We've got the 4 purposes in Wales, but purpose is everything. I'm doing this curriculum rewrite with colleagues in, as I say, Barnsley, Leeds and Sheffield. And what we've decided is we're taking the should curriculum, but we're wrapping around it. We're wrapping around it the could, and we're using narratives and stories and context that will resonate with the children, so that they can understand the purpose of the curriculum that's being done to them. Well, it's not being done to them now. They're experiencing something great. They're being given agency, and they're being invited to be imaginative and creative. We might not write that down yet because we might get, we don't want to attract the attention of the suits just yet. Do you know what I mean? Ofsted. We're just cracking on. And we're being innovative in that small way. I think a key headline for me as well, from listening to everyone, is this idea of how do we make learning matter? And that's not just matter to the children, because obviously we want that, but it's how do we make it matter? How do we get the biology teacher who's brilliant, and she's got loads of ideas around what science should look like in secondary, particularly Key Stage 3. How do we get that brilliant colleague to also look across to the performing arts, to expressive arts, and see the potential, and to look at language and literacy, and how do we get them to see the possibilities there? So, I mean, I've got all these little, I don't want them to be buzzwords. I'm not a buzzword merchant. But ambition, purpose, culture, which Richard spoke beautifully about. How do we move all that on? Well, we've got to do it carefully. And we've got to use the curriculum, allow the new curriculum, and allow curriculum to put its arms around not just the children, but the teachers as well. The development of professional imagination, I think, is paramount. I'm going to stop there because of your time. I hope that's okay. I could bang on for ages, but I won't.
It's so upsetting. It's so upsetting that I even give Hywel Roberts my blooming job to sum up, and he does that better than me as well. I mean, this is just totally unfair. And now that he's dressing in my waistcoats, I mean, things are over between you and me, Roberts. That was brilliant. But I think
they're just beginning.
I think the whole evening's been brilliant. And we've had so much to cram into this. I'm conscious that we haven't had as much chat and as much conversation as we normally have. But I think people have been really inspired by Graham, who brings a vision consistently. And I think now, in a sense, almost liberated from the central role that he had here when he was Chief Inspector, and able to really fully engage and fully express himself in what he does in Wales. And the learning that's going behind that, absolutely terrific. Really grateful for that. I've so enjoyed the preparation for this with Kat, with Ty, with Richard, and tonight's just been an absolute culmination from all of that. Real passion, real thoughtfulness, a real sense of people who care deeply about children and care deeply about learning. And Hywel captured all of that brilliantly. And that's the big message from tonight, I think, that this is about learning, but it needs to be learning for everyone. And it needs to be learning that's informed by a sense of purpose. And that's just an absolutely brilliant reminder, I think, from everyone. We can make changes, but we need to be prepared to make the changes. So many points, Hywel, that I'd like to make too, but I just really, I think, need to respect people's time. Thank you so much for your contributions from tonight. But to everyone else, thank you very much for coming. Hope you got something from it, and bye for now.